There's this thing about programming that becomes frustrating. We already kind of talked about it. A lot of the times when it comes to exercise decisions, they'll come from a couple of different ways. One is maybe you've fallen into this. I definitely have, where we will have our own program and kind of how we exercise. And then we'll just try and water it down or modify it to fit the other person. Maybe you'll make exercise decisions solely based on the equipment available. It's okay. I've got some dumbbells, maybe some kettlebells or a cable, and that's what dictates a lot of the decisions. If we're not prepared and you've got a bunch of clients on the spot, what happens, unfortunately, is you'll just be like, okay, what are we doing now? And then it'll be like, okay, let's do this over here. Oh, the bench is available. Or sometimes a trainer will just ask the client, what do you want to do? They'll just outsource a lot of the decisions. And so oftentimes when it comes to programming, for really understandable reasons, there's a lack of structure. If we have an understanding and a systematic way of programming, basically step one, step two, step three, it generally makes the exercise routines or programs or situations a little bit safer because we'll know more what the person is able to do versus taking risks. Because we've made the decision in advance and we have an intention going in, it tends to be more effective. That means the outcomes are going to be a little bit more reliable. And we're just able to spend the brief amount of time that we're with someone, perhaps 2 hours out of a 168-hour week, more meaningfully. And so that makes the time more productive, like all of which has better outcomes, which is good for the person, good for us, and good for business. It also simplifies the training process. There are a huge number of possible decisions that we have to make. What is the exercise? What is the load? Do we have to modify it? When do we change it? How do we change it? How do we know? There's just a bunch of ambiguity. And so if we can make some decisions ahead of time, it clears out a lot of the noise and allows us to focus. And if we know what we're doing, that confidence will be expressed on the floor and we will have a stronger position of authority. And a person is just going to trust us more versus they're going to look at us like, man, I heard a little doubt in your voice. Do I need to actually work that hard if you don't really think we do? So if we know what we're doing, we're just confident. And if we're confident, the person's going to trust us. Everybody wins.
You said it's common for programming to not really have structure. I myself do enjoy and appreciate structure and efficiency. So I could see why step B or plan B, what you're recommending for safety reasons, productivity, is the ideal way to approach
Totally.
it.
Yeah, it's definitely
Okay.
better.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do with a program is cause a person to adapt to something. The whole goal of a program is to induce change or adaptation. And so when we endeavor an exercise, usually it's challenging. And after a while, you typically get better and you will get better in the way that you've been challenged. Adaptation happens in a bunch of different ways. If you play an instrument, you probably started where it was really hard and you sounded bad. And then over time, it typically got easier to play well. And you got better at playing that instrument. So playing the piano doesn't make you better at playing the trombone. Like you get better at that music or at that instrument or in that genre. You get better based on how you're challenged. And exercise and fitness is the same thing. It works off the same principle. So when we're looking at adaptation, it's our physiology's way to kind of mold itself to some kind of a stressor. If something is challenging in the environment, that can be either using lots of bodily resources, energy resources, or causing unnecessary burden on the body. Just all animals, all plants, animals, all organisms have the ability to adjust to make those stressors less, to accommodate the stressors. And adaptation is the primary driver for people endeavoring an exercise to either change the way that they look, to change their health status, or something related to their performance, or really all three. A lot of people want to look better, feel better, and perform better. But we're talking about these adaptations or changes based on stressors. I'm going to use two different time frames. We'll talk about long-term adaptations. That's like in days, weeks, or months, but also short-term adaptations. So for example, right now, your cardiorespiratory system is adapted to being at rest. So your breathing rate and heart rate are totally in sync with your current intensity. If you just got up and started running based on that higher level of intensity, the heart rate and breathing rate are going to be adjusting, right? They will adapt to that intensity. And then you finish your run, you go sit down again, and then your heart rate and breathing rate trickle back down. So these changes in our systems based on changes in demand are just short-term adaptations. And then obviously, if you engage in exercise long-term, then there's going to be a longer, deeper adaptation that sets in. Better cardiorespiratory abilities, better metabolism, better this and that and the other thing. So acute stresses, daily efforts, whatever that is, will ultimately have a stickiness that kind of contribute to a deeper, more long-term chronic adaptation that happens.
Got it.
So when we're looking at kind of the curve of an adaptation, typically the first thing that happens is what's called alarm. And that's your body's initial response to some kind of a stressor. Then the body will start shifting itself to accommodate whatever that stressor is. But if that stressor is too much or too long and the body can no longer accommodate it, it basically bonks. It hits some kind of an exhaustion. So you can think of this in maybe a different way, like tanning. So if at the beginning of summertime, you go outside for a while, you're a little bit pasty and you don't tan, what happens is you get a sunburn. And so your skin is, holy shit, what are all these extra UV rays? And you inflame. And then days afterwards, not while we tan, but after we're in the sun, your skin starts to release melanin. The skin will start to shed its outside layer. It goes through this longer shift to basically build a resilience against whatever that stressor was. But if you're out in the sun too long, too often, we start getting some issues with skin. That could be skin cancer. So that would be like an excess of that exposure. So there's this initial response to an exposure, which is usually some kind of a freak out, a longer term kind of accommodation where everything's changing in the body to harmonize with the stress. But if something's within an excess, that can basically cause a decline in performance. The way that this relates to exercise is going to be having a baseline of performance. So for you, it's how long you can run or how much you can lift. However you want to measure a key performance capability, it's whatever your ability is. That's your baseline. If we give you a challenge that is beyond that, what typically happens is you'll feel like a piece of shit the next day. So if you normally do 3 sets of a chest exercise and then you do 5 sets, the next day, probably going to feel it. If you run 2 miles pretty well, and then you run 6 miles, the next day, you're probably going to feel it. So that's where we get like this alarm and then a little bit of a decline, meaning if you really challenge yourself, you can't repeat that same level of effort. But over time, you'll heal. You'll come back to baseline. And if you give enough time, you'll super compensate. So that whatever was the challenge before becomes doable. So if before you run 2 miles, you run 3 miles, your body will feel like a piece of shit. You feel a little bit better. Now you run 3 miles. You do 2 sets, but you do 5 sets. You come back. Now you can do 5 sets. So the body has to go through this kind of curve of overload, some type of a decline, and then you'll recover and supercompensate. A program structures this so that we can optimize what is going to be challenging but safe, go through a recovery process, hit this kind of a peak, and then we will progress. So if this is a new baseline, we now have to apply a new kind of an overload. And so this is all we do. We apply stress onto a person's physiology, let them go through their recovery and supercompensation, and then we hit them again. That's it.
Okay.
So a general goal of a program is to minimize the alarm phase, maximize their resistance development, basically their gain, and try to avoid exhaustion altogether. And so playing with intensities and durations and exercise selection, all the really little decisions that we're actually making out there on the gym floor is meant to manifest this big thing. So we're going to go through some basic principles that then we can make selections with the OPT model. And then we'll have a little moment just to kind of catch up. So when we look at a program, a piece of paper, it should have some characteristics to it. So I know it's all written. There's a name of an exercise. There's like how many sets or how many reps. There's all these like numbers and words related to it. But it's what are we trying to do? It should have some amount of overload. It should challenge a person. It shouldn't be easy to do. It should also relate to what a person's outcome wants to be. It should lead to a wanted end. And because we accommodate to an overload, a specific overload, we'll have to move the program forward. We will have to progress it. So of the 5 principles of adaptation, we're really wanting to focus on 3. In terms of like variation, if a person wants to be like stronger with their pushing, then we'll do some maybe barbell, maybe some dumbbell, maybe some cables, maybe some push-ups. So they're all categorically pushing exercises, but there is some variation within that specific effort of pushing. When it comes to individualization, that's what is the person's limitation? What are some of their structural and functional characteristics, as well as their goals? So if you have 5 people that want to get more functional based on where they're starting with their structural and functional capacities and their more specific outcomes, whether they want to be a grandma, grandpa, if they're a firefighter, or if they're a construction worker, all of their functional training might have to be a little bit different. Just me checking in. Do you have any questions so far? Am I moving at an okay pace or too fast?
No, this is great.
Okay.
This is so helpful.
So the first of the 3 principles that we're going to review is the overload principle. That basically means you're going to be stressing a system beyond its capacity. That means a person has to get to some kind of fatigue or decline in performance. And this is kind of duh. So if you're going to be doing an exercise and you put a certain load on there, towards the end of the set, how do you know it was heavy enough? You slowed down. Maybe you didn't die under the bar, but you went from 5, 6, 7. You got into a couple of repetitions that started to get challenging. That means it was beyond a particular capacity. What this does is cues to the body, holy shit, we have an issue, which is the whole point of it, right? It induces the general adaptation syndrome. This overload induces alarm. If it's insufficient overload, then it's not going to trigger the body to change. It was possible. It was accommodated. It was not a problem. If it's an excessive overload, it can create issues on the body, right? From injury to other things. So there's like a sweet spot of not too easy, not too hard, but like a spectrum of enough. So overloads lead to adaptations. Next, we have specificity. There's an acronym that goes by specific adaptation to imposed demand, or the SAID principle. And that basically means the body will change specific to the overload placed on it. Don't even worry about exercise. Like if you're trying to learn a language, you have to practice the language that you want to learn. This is, if you want to learn Spanish, you know what you're going to have to practice? Spanish. If you want to learn an instrument, you know what you're going to have to practice? The instrument you want to get better at. So this is like an absolute duh situation. What's actually challenging is thinking about this when it comes to exercise. Because when you look at the gym and equipment, it's hard to be like, okay, based on what you're doing, how does this relate to what you do outside of the gym? And so you can imagine if someone is like learning a language, that they're not trying to just get better in the Spanish class. They're trying to get better when they go to Mexico or when they're speaking with their Spanish friends. There's some kind of a utility to those courses. If there's no utility, guess what? It doesn't stick. Same thing with language, same thing with music. What is it that we actually adapt to? What is it about exercise? Is it the time of day? Is it going to be the color of the equipment? What do we actually get better at? So if we were to look at a movement, squatting, hinging, burpees, whatever the activity is, and you deconstruct it into these three characteristics, like a neuromuscular specificity, a metabolic specificity, and mechanical specificity, these are the things that your body actually connects with, which is great because if we, within an exercise routine, see it not as the name of an exercise, but as a characteristic, it helps us understand if it's actually going to relate to a person and what they want to do. So the neuromuscular or kind of mind body control portion of things is going to be the speed at which people move. So if people exercise in slow ways, they get good at moving slowly. It won't necessarily make them good at moving fast. If people exercise in fast ways, they'll get good at fast. That doesn't mean they're going to get good at slow. So you will get better at the speed or speeds at which you work on. The funky part is like the environmental demands. So if you do some movements on an ice skating rink, you'll probably get better at an ice skating rink. That doesn't mean you're going to get better at like street hockey if you practice on ice. Yes, it's still hockey, but the environment and the situation is a little bit different. The other part could be like temperature. So if people exercise when it's warm, they get better at dealing with heat. Cold, they get better at dealing with the cold. Next is going to be metabolic. We're going to keep this nice and simple because it spring loads into some weird stuff, but you get better at the intensity and duration that you train at. So when it comes to like maximal strength training, it's very high intensity, but a very short duration. So you get good at high intensity, short duration. Let's be weird about this. If you get good at sprinting, if you practice sprinting, that is very high intensity, short duration. That's not going to make you better at a marathon. So if a person came to you and say, listen, I'm going to get better at running, they just say running, and that's their specificity. Oh, great. What are you going to do? I signed up for a 10K. Wonderful. How are you training for that? Sprints. I'm running as fast as I can for 10 seconds. You'll be like, listen, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's probably not going to turn out the way that you think. Why? It's running. But the intensity and duration of your running is not really matching the intensity and duration of the event. So without knowing all this like metabolic specificity and your anaerobic pace and metabolic, you're like, listen, intensity and duration. And that's another way to look at things. Lastly, it's going to be the load or mechanical. So it's how much load is present dictates how much force your body needs to produce. Light loads, light force, medium loads, medium force, heavy loads, high force, and the direction of motion. So if you do exercise like this, overhead pressing, your body will get better doing that. So this is like if you practice squats, you get better at squats. If you practice heavy squats, you get better at heavy squats. If you practice light squats, you get better at light squats. So what's cool is these specificities are all together. These are joined characteristics of any type of movement. Whatever the activity is, you can look at it from a neuromuscular, metabolic, and mechanical standpoint. Now, here's why this is important. When we look at the OPT model, and it's got like a stabilization phase, strength phase, and power phase, those are three different broad characteristics of movement. And you can have, let's say, squatting done in each phase. So squatting would be like in a stabilization phase, would be slow, light, long duration, and probably unstable. Squatting in a strength phase will likely be medium to heavy loads. It'll be done at medium speeds and probably be done in stable environments. And then power squatting, also known as jumping, will be done at high intensities, short durations in stable, unstable environments. So you're like, oh, what does a squat on a Bosu ball, a barbell back squat, and a jump have in common? They're all like squatting patterns. One is going to be slow and long, unstable. The other is going to be heavy and medium, stable. The other is fast and short, stable. And so when it says like progressing someone through the phases, you're choosing a pattern, a pushing pattern, pulling, squatting, hinging, whatever their mechanical specificity, their direction of motion, whatever their movement pattern is. And then you apply a variety of characteristics all the way through the levels. And that's essentially how you progress a movement pattern.
Got it.
So it's not just overloads that lead to adaptations, it's specific overloads that lead to specific adaptations. So we look at something like this, and it's okay, what the hell is this person doing? So if you just kind of went to Planet Fitness, went in the corner and saw somebody doing this, you're like, what is this weird Instagram bullshit that this person is doing? Now, let's just have a moment. So looking at the movement, some of the specificities, how the ground is coming up, and there's this irregular pulling. Can you imagine a sport that this person is preparing for, that is training for?
Off the top of my head, I can't.
What would be a
Would it be like surfing, not surfing,
so
or
it could be surfing because the person's on the board and it's the bottom, it's the ground that's going up and down. So the person on the surfboard has to absorb the ground. So it could be surfing.
I'm also thinking like horseback riding
It
or
could be horseback riding. That's also great. The person is maybe holding the reins, right? And they're on the horse and they have to stay centered, but the horse is going up and down. So I want to really commend you. It's downhill mountain biking. But listen, you were so good because what you were trying to do in your mind was look at the character, the structured characteristics of these movements, the specificities, and then trying to think to yourself in real life, what has similar specificities? And you actually came up with a couple of them. You're like, could be surfing, could be horseback riding, could be downhill mountain biking. And who would have thought that you would have taken these three different sports and actually looked at it commonly, where the body has to stay in place, it's the ground that's moving, where a bunch of other sports, the ground stays in place and it's the body that moves. So now you're actually seeing things from a specificity standpoint, not being like, what's the name of this exercise? What muscles does it work? You're like, what are the specificities? If this person got good at this, how would that carry over into the real world? What is it simulating? And that's what basically weight training and exercise is. It's a practiced, repetitive simulation of some kind of specificity that you want to carry over into the real world.
gotcha. Okay, this makes so much sense. And this really, the way you're breaking it down is pretty incredible.
Last one that we're going to move on. Let's see. What time is it too? Oh, we're good. We're so good. All right. So you challenged yourself, then you got a little bit better. In order to continue getting better, you have to re-challenge yourself. So maybe you go from Spanish 1 to Spanish 2 to Spanish 3. You go from beginner level piano to intermediate level piano to advanced piano. If you just keep year after year taking Spanish 1, all you do is get better at Spanish 1. Like taking the same difficulty for a longer time doesn't get better. It has to escalate or it has to progress. So it's a reapplication of the overload after the first adaptation has settled in. Maybe it takes a week, maybe it takes 2 weeks, maybe it takes a month. How long does it take for the person to adapt? A time frame. But whenever that marinates and settles in, time to move on. And so if we have some guidelines on how frequently to change the program, do we change it monthly? Do we change it every 2 weeks? Do we have a line of progressions? Do we go from 10 pounds to 15 pounds to 20 pounds? Are we going, so do we increase it by 10 pounds or 15, whatever it is? Those are great questions. But what they all have in common is it is harder or more complex or more challenging. And so without going deep into this in this kind of presentation, when we look at the acute variables like sets, reps, tempo, things like that, frequency, exercise order, all these things, all that's trying to do is control overload. And then if you go from 3 sets to 4 sets, that is going to be increasing volume. If you go from 70% to 80% in 1 rep max, that increases load. If you go from slow to medium or medium to fast, that increases speed. So when we look at all these different acute variables, the numbers related to each phase of the OP2 model, it's just trying to contain a certain amount of overload. And then it gives you these dials to adjust the overload depending on the direction that you want to progress.
Got it.
Okay. So these are just like arbitrary ways of kind of like thinking about a program. So let's say we've got like month 1 through month 4, and then you've got your baseline. You give someone some kind of a challenge, they'll go through their, become a shit show, adapt, and then you hit them again, and then hit them again, and hit them again. So we may be like, okay, month 1, month 2, 3, 4. If it's going to be like volume, like how many sets of an exercise are you doing per week? We want to try and control volume. Maybe in the first month, we do 7 sets of an exercise. And then we add a couple of sets, add a couple of sets, add a couple of sets. So if you want to increase work capacity, just how much gas you have in the tank, then you're going to have to progress in volume. So this would be one way to think about that. If you want to, let's say, improve your cardiorespiratory endurance, then what you have to do is endure. You increase duration. And so maybe in terms of total weekly volume, cardio volume, maybe it's 60 minutes a week, and then 90 minutes a week, and then 120, and then 150. If you want to improve endurance, increase duration. If you want to increase strength, increase load. But notice though, there's like what you are trying to improve and how that dictates how you change the challenge. It makes it very simple because it cancels out all the other noise. So if I'm trying to improve on my endurance, I'm not really thinking about how fast the person is running. I'm not like, we have to run faster. Actually, that would not be helpful because the faster you try and run, the shorter the duration you're going to try and get into. So I'm not actually worried about any other way to change the program aside from increasing in duration. Or when it comes to strength, do you have to change the exercise? Do we have to go from like a bench to a ball? Do we have to go cables? Do we have to go alternate? No, all of that, all those other decisions are ancillary. You got to increase load. So whatever you need to do to increase load over time, that's what you focus on. And you get to ignore everything else. It all becomes noise. If you're trying to make Mexican food and you go to the store, you don't go down the Chinese food aisle. You don't go down the Indian food aisle. You don't go down any other aisle but the Mexican food aisle. But if you just walk into the store and be like, I want to make food, you'll go through all the aisles and get a little bit of everything, and you come back and you can't make anything. But if you just go in to be like, Mexican food, you fucking beeline right to there and ignore everything else. Same thing with exercise. If you know the adaptation you're choosing for that month, you just stay on task, ignore all the other distraction. It's wonderful. Okay. So we're gonna switch it a little bit and look now at the OPT model and how each of these phases try and aim for a hierarchy of progressive adaptations. That was just like a mouthful of words, but here we go.
I followed you.
Okay. Come on. Okay, this is being very difficult. Do you see a screen that says OPT model?
Yep.
Okay. Okie dokie. So the Optimum Performance Training model, I think it's pretty cool because it takes the different ways or the different abilities that a human being have. We can control our body. We can produce force in different ways. And then we can also move at different speeds. So these are just characteristics of a human. And it puts it in a hierarchy of intensity. So you can be, the amount of power that you can produce is based on the strength that you have available. And the amount of strength that you can produce is how well that joint or segment or joint system or whatever it is can stabilize. So it's a human performance paradigm, not just a model of progression. The reason they talk about it being a model of progression is because the characteristics of the OPT model match the characteristics of a human. And so if we progress through the phases, it tends to connect with our physiology really well. And so that's why you have some of these weird terms that could be related to a human characteristic, but also a program, because that's what makes it a functional program. It's based on humans, not just like abstract concepts. So we've got 3 levels, a stabilization level at the bottom. Stabilization just means control. That's it. So we have a control level at the bottom. There is one phase called stabilization endurance. That just means control for a long time. The strength level has 3 different phases. There are 3 different kind of characteristics of our muscular system, neuromuscular system, that can produce force. So strength endurance, if strength just means force production, strength endurance now means move for a long time. So stabilization endurance is control for a long time. Strength endurance is now move or produce force for a long time. Muscular development is going to be like the growth of muscle. It's more on the like mechanical development of muscle, increasing in muscle size, in muscle density, muscular characteristics, tissue specific characteristics that relate to force output. And then maximal strength is going to be developing peak force, how much absolute force a person can do. Here's another way of thinking about how force is produced by the body. One way is going to be metabolic. So it's how much energy do your muscles have to produce force over time. Next, it's going to be how much mass do your muscles move to produce force. And then maximal strength, it's actually all neurological. So when you actually get stronger from like maximal strength training, the biggest contribution to that is changes in the brain. It's just recruiting more tissue faster with better coordination. So there are 3 different physiological contributions to force output your body has. There's a metabolic, cellular, and neural contribution. And so this 3-phase or 3-tiered level allows us to focus on one of these kind of contributions at a time from a lower intensity to higher intensity format. So strength endurance, typically you're going to be on the lower strength intensities, 70 to 80%, 1 rep max. If you look at those numbers, muscular development is going to be pretty broad, but I think in NASM, generally speaking, you're looking at 75 to 85%. And then for maximal strength, you're at like 85 to 100% of your 1 rep max. So there's 3 different levels doing different things, but it's still in a hierarchy of general intensity. And then power is going to be on top. Our ability to move quickly or produce speed over time, power over time, high force, short period of time, is all dictated on the previous levels. So it's not saying you have to go with a human being phase 1 through 5 in order, like a linear block periodization. But it's just saying if a person wants to be more powerful, run faster, will probably have to actually work on their strength. And if they want to be stronger, we'll probably actually have to stabilize them. Imagine someone has like a car that's just super shitty. It's been like in the backyard for 20 years. And they're like, hey, I want to take my car that's been in my backyard. It's got bees in it. They're like, I want to take it around the track. You're like, listen, I know you want to be fast in your car. We should probably work on the engine and make sure it's producing enough force. But if your engine's producing force and your suspension is all over the place, you can't even control your power. You can't control your force. You can't control your engine. So we actually have to improve on your suspension and your brakes and your tires, all the things that help to steer your strength. We'll have to work on, and then we'll work on your force output. And then we'll actually work on how well you can go in and out of the turns. Can't just go out there and drive around. Questions so far?
Nope.
Okay, we feel good?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have our 3 phases, 3 levels, 5 phases. Just forget what I just said. We just got the OPT model, right? General goals. And then there are a bunch of different types of exercises. So flexibility. So if we look at like NASM 7th edition stuff, it'll probably say like flexibility activation, maybe for core. Then there's like skill work, and that could be like balance training, reactive or plyometric training, as well as speed, agility, and quickness, cardiorespiratory training. I should have, and then resistance training is on the left. So there we go. These are different types of exercises. The reason we're thinking about different abilities of a person, their range of motion control, how well they can control the center of the body, what their ability is to maintain their center of gravity over a base of support, their ability for the muscles to react to the ground contact time. Maybe it's going to be their linear velocity, multi-directional speed, maybe their response to a changing environment, their ability to create energy, different amounts of energy over different periods of time. That's regulated by the cardiorespiratory system. And then resistance training is just producing force with different bodily movements in different directions, right? You have these types of exercises. Typically, when we have somebody in a phase, like we're in stabilization endurance, you're going to do a couple of different styles of exercise. Right? Probably going to do some stretching, probably some core, and probably some weight training. And so what's nice is if we can take these different types of exercises and choose them so that they have some kind of a harmonious connection, then when we do all these different styles of exercise that have some kind of a similar characteristic, it really supports getting them to the total adaptation of the phase. And so what we'll get into is, okay, what are the goals of stabilization endurance? And it's got like a bullet pointed list. It's just to do all these things. So great. How does it do that? It's characteristics of these different styles of exercise that when cumulatively adapted, so when you adapt to self-myofascial release techniques and static stretching, some isometric core exercises, balance exercises with little or no motion, maybe reactive exercises where you hold a landing for 3 to 5 seconds, just all these different types of exercises with their characteristics. That's what gives you the outcome of the phase. So we just went over like principles of adaptation where there's an overload, specific overload, and then you have to move the program forward a little bit to get them a little bit better. With these phases, they have their primary adaptations that they're going for. If you do things right, how should you be better? That's on the left-hand side. So you see it says like mobility and flexibility and core and joint stabilization and postural alignment and control and muscular and endurance adaptations. Wouldn't it be nice to have all these things? Here's a way to interpret the utility of stabilization endurance and more or less how it would apply on the person. As you probably discovered either through the text or just being out there in the real world, a lot of people are pretty sedentary, out of shape, deconditioned. They have movement impairments, right? Maybe their shoulders don't let the arms go up overhead, their back arches, their knees fall in, their feet turn. So people have really poor mobility, poor control. They don't have really good just body control. I just worked with someone today where I needed them to reach forward and just telling them reach forward and their body was doing all these squirrely things. And I'm like, just reach forward. But they had terrible body control. So their body was all squirrely. So a lot of people are not ready to exercise in quote unquote meaningful ways. They got to get stabilized where they're wiggly and mobilized where they're stiff in order for them to then move on. So when we're trying to choose exercises for them, just think of it in terms of, okay, you're really tight in these areas. I'm going to choose flexibility training based on that. And then you're wiggly in these areas. And so I'm going to be trying to choose more activating elements based on that. Core training, maybe some resistance training based on the areas that are weak. And then there are other ways that you can improve and just control total body segmental control, things like that, like balance training. It's not just being a ninja, but if you put someone on a single leg and have them do something, they wiggle. And all their little wiggles requires little baby controls, little bibbity boops of like shimmies. And so that's how we kind of use like an unstable position to just get the nervous system to start paying attention and getting little bits of control. And they go from being shaky to then being steady. And once they're steady, you can load them. If they're shaky, can't load them. If they're steady, you load them. So you go from like simple exercises for them to then perhaps more complicated ones. So things where we don't rotate, maybe into then things where we rotate. Do exercises in a sagittal plane to then maybe a frontal plane. There's a bunch of different ways you can take something from quote unquote like simple or basic and then make it a little bit more advanced. There's a structured way to do things like 2-arm alternating single arm, bilateral stance, split stance, single leg stance, sagittal, frontal, transverse. There's different ways that you can strategically move someone from like basic to less basic.
That makes sense.
That second bullet says like progress exercises proprioceptively. Ugh. proprioception is like a body awareness.
Right.
And so if someone, it's wild, but like I've done assessments where a person's like knees fucking cave in and they touch. And I'm like, hey, did you know that your knees were moving in? I had no idea.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, we should probably build some awareness in how you move. And so that's basically what you want to focus on with a lot of coaching. It's helping people go from, I didn't know I was moving poorly like that, to now I know I'm poorly moving, to now I know how to control, meaning I go from, oh, my knees are moving in. Now my knees are not moving in. So a lot of it is like this whole like proprioceptively is to help people build awareness from moving poorly to move a little bit better. Awareness is the first step. And so that has like
Sure.
a lot of when it comes to coaching is helping people become aware of their current movement so that they can control towards better. And when it comes to increasing the complexity of exercise, it's really meant to help them improve on these things, to get them a little bit more control over their body. And that's really it. So stabilization endurance is just fancy schmancy terms for control over a long time. And so all of the exercises that we choose and coaching that we give them helps to manifest better control for a longer period of time. And so you just get charts. This is like in the text. We're not going to review this, but when you look at this initially, it's got just schemes on how many sets and reps and tempo and rest and intensity and things like that. Remember, all of these guidelines is to help us manifest moving more controlled for a longer period of time. And there's different ways than to choose stuff within this, but that's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Strength endurance is a little funky. Are there any phases that you would actually like to focus on, or you're like, I don't really need to worry about that one?
Probably not specifically, no, but I think I've come to the revelation throughout this presentation that you have, which is it's great that I over am overthinking a pretty simple concept in terms of like how you're supposed to approach this.
Do you like what kind of foods do you like to make? Like any cuisines in particular?
No, not anything in particular. I love all food. I
Okay. Do
love
you like
food.
Mexican food?
Sure.
Okay. Let's say you're going to be making Mexican food, right? And the goal of the Mexican food recipe is to make something that's spicy. So it's a spicy recipe that it's just spicy. And so you look at the ingredients list and it gives you like 10 different chilies and a bunch of different processes and names of things. And you're like, holy shit, what are all the names of these ingredients and the process of and the grinding and this and the order of this? And hold on, don't worry about the names of the ingredients. You're trying to make it spicy. And so whatever the ingredients are should result in spicy. And so what we get wrapped up in, understandably, when it comes to this, we're like, I have to memorize this for the test. A lot of complicated terms. Like, I got, remember, stabilization endurance and the different goals of it and stuff. You're like, yeah, but what the fuck does that mean? And so what I think when you take it from this standpoint, how I like to deconstruct it into like human talk, then it makes a lot more sense. And then you're not thinking, okay, hold on. Is it 1 to 3 sets? Is it 12 to 20 reps? You're like, oh, if I just go from 12 reps to 15 reps to 20 reps over a period of a month, just increase the number of reps they can do on it, then that means they're doing it longer. That means that's endurance. So I guess I should not go from 20 to 15 to 12. I should go from 12 to 15 to 20 because the goal is
Right.
stabilization endurance. And you might find that along the way, you're like, hey, we're going to do 20 repetitions. And along the way, at rep number 12, they start to fold in on their whatever push-ups. Their back starts to arch. And you're like, actually, you know what? We're not going to 20 reps because 8 of them, you look like a piece of shit. We're going to stay on 12 because you do that really well. And then now over the course of the month, let's see how many push-ups you can do without arching your back. And over time, you should get more repetitions of better technique. And that's an example of stabilization endurance. You just improve the duration of good technique.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Do you write all of your particular programs for your clients from scratch, or have you started using different tools that are every day? I think something new pops up as available to simplify the process, almost AI it.
Yeah, because I've been doing this a while, I've made a lot of programs and just like over time, I've seen how based on the person I have in front of me, certain blocks or certain ways to progress them will just better match where they are at. But yeah, I've got like lists of exercises, like big categories of Excel files that have all the different movement patterns, and then they all like progress from stable to unstable.
And
So
you
I can kind of,
developed all of those
yeah,
over time. That's incredible. So you essentially have your own library of programming.
yeah. And
Okay.
it's all about, yeah, being systematic. So I've done all the front work. So I just have to like, there's a person and then click, and then it just like basically populates. And then I'll make adjustments along the way, but it's enough to get me going. And then I just more or less know, depending on the person, am I going to be programming like over a period of months? Am I going phase 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2? Am I going to go whatever, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5? The way to periodize my programming is call it somewhat standard too, depending on the person and what they want to do.
Got it.
After this, if you want, we can like schedule time that you can have like a follow-up mentorship session, let you kind of metabolize this for a little bit. And then like in a couple of weeks or a month, we can do this again. And in fact, I think that is our time. I'm going to have to like run to a session. To put a bow on this, the OPT model is something that I very much enjoy, having been around the block a lot. And NASM does get like a lot of shit just because they're very corporate. You get like a million ads the moment you go near a website. But their assessment protocol, when it comes to like movement assessments, figuring out based on those impairments that you see, what muscle imbalances may be present, what could be overactive and underactive, and then taking those and then transferring it into a program. Whatever's tight, that's what you're going to be stretching. Whatever is weak, that's what you're going to be strengthening. And then some exercises are better at lengthening than others, and some exercises are better at strengthening than others. So there's a really good logic going from finding problems with assessments, solving problems with a program, and then implementing the solutions with some kind of coaching that makes it easier for decision making. It ignores a lot of noise to make things less ambiguous and help us be a little bit more confident. And clients understand that if there's some kind of a logic to your decision, they're just going to give you money. If people don't understand how you make your decisions, they're just going to be less reluctant investing in you.
Sure. No, this has been super helpful, and I would love to schedule a follow up.
Sweet. So I'll send you a link for another mentorship thing. You can just kind of plug it into my schedule. I think if we were going to like piggyback on this, we would take you through like understanding some of the movement assessments, just really just the process of looking at setting up and executing the overhead squat, using those findings to actually do the nuts and bolts of starting a program. So if we can walk you through the steps of assessment based on that, filling in boxes.
That sounds perfect. That sounds exactly where I feel like my next hesitation would be.
Groovy. Yeah. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I got some good practice out of it too. I like teaching, so this is my jam. And I look forward to working with you hopefully soon.
Oh gosh, thank you, Mark, so much. Thank you for your time today. And I'll keep an eye on my email to get something scheduled follow up for you. And I really do appreciate this.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.